It was a warm, sunny afternoon, and Officer Daniels cruised through the quiet suburbs in his patrol car. The streets were lined with neatly trimmed hedges and pristine houses, a picture of order and control, the kind of environment Daniels believed he upheld. After more than a decade on the force, Daniels carried himself with an air of authority that often crossed into arrogance. He saw his badge as a license to judge, to decide who belonged and who didn't. Born and raised in a small town, his biases had been ingrained early, shaped by the voices of his past. Those voices whispered now, reinforcing his belief that some people just didn't fit into places like this. Daniels adjusted his sunglasses, his sharp gaze scanning the neighborhood. His daily patrols were routine, often dull, but he thrived on moments when he could assert control. He told himself it was about safety, but deep down, he knew it was something else, a need to feel superior, to remind others of their place. As he turned a corner, a car caught his eye. An old sedan, modest and slightly worn, stood out against the luxury vehicles parked in driveways. Behind the wheel was an older black man, dressed simply in a plain shirt and glasses. Daniel's mind raced with assumptions. What's he doing here? Without any valid reason, he decided to act. Flipping on his lights, Daniels pulled behind the sedan. A smug smile crossed his face. Let's see what this guy is up to. The story was about to begin, but Daniels had no idea it would end with a lesson he'd never forget. The old sedan slowed to a stop by the curb, its engine giving a faint rattle before falling silent. Daniels stepped out of his patrol car, adjusting his belt as he approached the driver's side window with deliberate slowness. The man inside rolled the window down, his movements calm yet measured, his expression polite but wary. "Good afternoon, officer. Is there a problem?" the man asked, his voice steady but carrying a hint of caution. Daniels smirked, his authority taking center stage. "License and registration," he barked, his tone devoid of courtesy. The man complied without hesitation, retrieving his documents and handing them over. Daniels barely glanced at them, letting the papers hang limply in his hand as he leaned against the car. His eyes scanned the man with undisguised disdain, taking in every detail as if searching for an excuse to escalate the situation. "Where you headed, old man?" Daniels asked sharply, the question laced with suspicion. "Just heading home after visiting my daughter," the man replied softly, his calm demeanor unwavering. Daniels scoffed, crossing his arms. "Sure you're not up to something? This isn't exactly the kind of neighborhood for someone like you." The man's jaw tightened for a moment, the only visible reaction to the insult. He took a breath before responding, his voice even. "Officer, is there a reason you stopped me?" Daniels leaned in closer, his voice dropping as if sharing a secret. "You look suspicious." "That's reason enough. People like you always have something to hide." His words dripped with prejudice, a toxic blend of authority and bias. The man met Daniel's gaze, his eyes steady and unflinching. For a moment it seemed as though he might say something, but he remained silent. Daniel stared back, feeling an odd flicker of discomfort at the man's composure. After a few more moments of unnecessary questioning, Daniels handed back the documents with a dismissive flick of his wrist. "Get out of here," he muttered under his breath. As the man drove off without a word, Daniels turned back to his patrol car, feeling a surge of smug satisfaction. Little did he know, the man he had just humiliated was about to turn his world upside down. The next morning, the precinct buzzed with energy. A new supervisor was set to join the department, and the officers were eager to make a good impression. Most of them exchanged speculations about their incoming leader's reputation: tough, fair, no nonsense. Daniels, however, was indifferent. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, exuding his usual air of untouchable confidence. As the officers gathered in the briefing room, the captain walked in, followed by a man in a sharp suit with an air of quiet authority. Daniel's eyes swept over him casually, but then his stomach dropped. It was him. The older black man from the day before stood before the room, his posture calm yet commanding. He scanned the faces in the crowd with an unreadable expression before the captain spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor to introduce Mr. James Carter, our new chief of police. Chief Carter brings decades of experience, integrity, and leadership to this department. Let's give him a warm welcome." Applause erupted in the room, but Daniels couldn't move. His hands grew clammy, his face pale as the realization set in. James Carter, the man he had belittled and dismissed less than 24 hours ago, was now his boss. Carter's gaze swept over the room again, pausing for a moment when it landed on Daniels. Recognition flickered in his eyes, but he didn't react. Instead, he smiled warmly and began speaking. Good morning, everyone. I'm honored to be here and excited to work alongside you. My leadership style is simple. I believe in respect, accountability, and fairness. These are not just words, they are values that define how we serve our community and how we treat one another, both on and off duty. Daniels felt the weight of every word like a hammer. His chest tightened, and a wave of shame washed over him. The man he had dismissed so easily the day before now stood as a symbol of everything Daniels had neglected to embody as an officer. As the meeting concluded, Carter approached Daniels. The room had begun to clear, but Daniels stood frozen, unsure whether to run or face the inevitable. Officer Daniels, isn't it? Carter said, his voice calm but firm. Daniels swallowed hard, his voice cracking. Yes, sir. Carter's expression was neutral, but his eyes carried a quiet strength. We've met before, haven't we? Daniels nodded, unable to meet his gaze. Yes, sir, yesterday. Carter nodded again, a faint smile playing on his lips. Interesting how people show their true colors when they think no one's watching. Daniels opened his mouth to apologize, but Carter raised a hand, stopping him. Save it. What matters now is how you choose to move forward. Respect isn't a given, it's earned. Let's see if you're up to it. Without waiting for a response, Carter walked away, leaving Daniels standing there, humbled and speechless. In that moment, Daniels realized his actions had not just embarrassed him, they had exposed the flaws in the very core of his character. The lesson was clear: treating others with dignity wasn't just a duty. It was a necessity. As the weeks passed, Daniels couldn't shake the humiliation and guilt that had consumed him since the encounter with Chief Carter. The chief's words, calm yet cutting, echoed in his mind. Respect isn't a given, it's earned. Daniels had always viewed himself as untouchable, someone above accountability. But now, every decision, every interaction with his colleagues and the public, felt like a test. He knew that Carter was watching not to punish, but to see if Daniels would rise to the challenge of becoming the officer he claimed to be. At first, the changes were small. Daniels started by listening more during roll calls, something he'd previously brushed off as routine. On patrol, he forced himself to be more deliberate and professional in his interactions. When pulling someone over, he took the time to explain the reason instead of barking orders. He realized how much of his work had been driven by ego rather than service. But the real turning point came one afternoon when Daniels responded to a call about a disturbance at a local park. When he arrived, he found two teenagers arguing. One was black, the other white. Both hurled accusations and insults, the tension ready to boil over. In the past, Daniels might have assumed the black teenager was the instigator, letting his biases guide his actions. This time, however, he paused, taking a deep breath before stepping in. All right, let's calm down, he said, addressing both boys evenly. What's going on here? He listened to both sides, treating them with equal respect. In the end, it turned out to be a simple misunderstanding over a basketball game. Daniels diffused the situation without escalating it, sending both teenagers home with a warning. As he drove away, Daniels felt something he hadn't felt in years: pride. Not the smug satisfaction he used to feel after intimidating someone, but genuine pride in having done the right thing. Word of Daniels' gradual transformation spread through the precinct. Officers who had once been wary of him began to notice the changes. He was more approachable, more patient, and even started volunteering for community outreach programs, something he had scoffed at in the past. One day, after a precinct-wide meeting, Chief Carter approached Daniels again. This time, his tone was less formal, more personal. Officer Daniels, he said, I've noticed the changes you've been making. Daniels stood up straighter, unsure of what was coming next. Thank you, sir. I've been trying to do better. Carter nodded, his expression softening. It's not easy to confront your own mistakes, let alone change because of them. But you've started down the right path. Keep it up. The words hit Daniels harder than any reprimand ever could. They weren't just praise, they were acknowledgement that he was capable of being more than his past. From that day forward, Daniels continued to grow, driven by the lesson Carter had taught him. Respect wasn't just a rule to follow, it was the foundation of everything he stood for as an officer. And while he couldn't erase his past mistakes, he could ensure they didn't define his future. For the first time in his career, Daniels understood what it truly meant to serve and protect. Months went by, and Officer Daniels continued to build on the foundation of change he had started. His interactions with his colleagues were more respectful, and he had gained the trust of the community he served. Yet, despite his progress, Daniels knew that the real test of his transformation had not yet come. True character, he realized, was revealed not in the easy moments, but in the difficult ones, the ones where old habits and prejudices could resurface. One rainy evening, while on patrol with his partner, Daniels received a call about a suspicious person wandering near a local store. The description matched that of a black man, and Daniels' gut reaction was a mixture of discomfort and automatic suspicion. He shook his head, trying to suppress the instinct to judge based on appearance, but old patterns crept into his thoughts. "Let's check it out," Daniels said to his partner, his voice steady but his mind racing. He knew this was a moment where he had to choose the kind of officer he wanted to be. When they arrived, they saw the man standing near the entrance of the store, his posture unthreatening. He was holding a few bags of groceries, looking up at the rain as it fell steadily around him. As they approached, Daniels' partner immediately got out of the car and approached the man, hand on his holster. Daniels stayed in the car, frozen for a moment. The old Daniels, the one who had been quick to judge and act without question, would have joined in, perhaps even escalated the situation. But the new Daniels, the one who had spent months trying to earn back his respect, knew better. "Hold on," Daniels said, stepping out of the car. He walked towards his partner, signaling him to stand down. "Let me talk to him first." His partner gave him a quizzical look, but Daniels walked up to the man with calm authority. "Good evening, sir. I'm Officer Daniels. You all right?" The man looked up, slightly startled but relaxed, nodding. "Yeah, I'm fine, officer. Just got some food for my family." Daniels studied his face, watching for any signs of aggression, but found none. He took a deep breath and said, "I understand. We've had some reports of suspicious activity in the area. Mind if I ask where you're headed?" "Home," the man replied, his tone even and polite. "I live just down the street. I wasn't doing anything wrong." Daniels could feel the old, automatic suspicion starting to fade. Instead of leaning into it, he chose to really listen to the man's words and the way he carried himself. There was nothing in the man's demeanor that suggested anything out of the ordinary. "All right," Daniels said, stepping back slightly, "just making sure everything's good. Thank you for your cooperation." As Daniels and his partner got back in the car, he felt a sense of relief wash over him. His partner didn't say anything, but Daniels could tell he had noticed the shift in his behavior. The old Daniels would have made the situation tense and perhaps even unnecessarily confrontational. But this time he had handled it with dignity and respect for the man's humanity. The next day, Daniels walked into the precinct feeling lighter. He hadn't just avoided a potential conflict, he had proven to himself that he could stand by the values he had been trying to embrace. The real test wasn't just about being better on the surface, it was about digging deeper and making the right choice when it counted. Chief Carter, who had observed the interaction from a distance, pulled Daniels aside later that morning. "I saw what happened last night," Carter said quietly. "You did the right thing." Daniels felt a weight lift off his shoulders, but Carter's next words hit him with even more significance. "The real measure of integrity is how you act when no one's watching. It's clear that you're beginning to understand that." Daniels nodded, feeling a sense of gratitude that he hadn't felt in years. The lessons he had learned were starting to form a new understanding of who he was, not just as an officer, but as a person. From that moment on, Daniels knew that the true challenge of growth wasn't just about learning from his mistakes, it was about staying committed to doing better every single day. And with every small decision, every moment of doubt he overcame, he was inching closer to becoming the officer and the man that he had always aspired to be. It had been a year since Officer Daniels' encounter with Chief Carter, and the transformation that had begun with that fateful day had now become a cornerstone of his identity. Daniels had evolved into a more thoughtful, accountable officer, one who treated every person he encountered with respect, regardless of race or background. Yet, he knew that his journey wasn't just about his own redemption, it was about his responsibility to serve and protect with integrity, something that could only be truly tested in the most difficult moments. One chilly evening, Daniels was called to the scene of a domestic disturbance in a neighborhood known for its high crime rate. As he arrived, the situation seemed tense. A woman was standing on the front porch, crying, and a man was shouting angrily inside. Daniels had dealt with many calls like this, but something felt different this time. His instincts, which had once been clouded with bias and assumptions, were now sharper, grounded in his newfound understanding of people's stories. As he approached the porch, Daniels introduced himself, his tone calm and measured. I'm Officer Daniels. Can you tell me what happened?" Through her tears, the woman explained that her partner had been drinking heavily, and things had escalated quickly. She feared for her safety, but didn't want to press charges. Daniels listened intently, offering reassurance, but he knew the situation wasn't just about calming the woman down. It was about finding the truth and ensuring everyone's safety. When Daniels entered the house, the man was still shouting. He immediately took a step back, assessing the situation, recalling the lessons Carter had taught him about de-escalation. He didn't rush in with force. Instead, he spoke firmly but respectfully. "Sir, I need you to calm down and listen to me," Daniels said, his voice steady. "This isn't going to help anyone. Let's talk this through." The man sneered but stopped shouting. "What do you want, huh?" "I'm here to make sure both of you are safe," Daniels replied. "You've got a lot of anger right now. Let's figure this out without it getting out of hand." For a long moment, the two men stared at each other, Daniels trying to assess whether the situation could be diffused without further escalation, and the man eyeing Daniels, challenging him. But instead of reacting aggressively, Daniels remained calm, never allowing the anger in the room to dictate his own emotions. "I know things are hard," Daniels continued, his voice softening, "but we need to keep control. No one wants anyone to get hurt." Eventually, the man dropped his aggressive stance, and the situation began to de-escalate. Daniels was able to convince the man to sit down and listen, as he explained the next steps. The woman was safely escorted away from the house and given resources for support, while Daniels worked with his partner to ensure the man understood the gravity of the situation. After everything was resolved and the woman was safe, Daniels stood outside the house, taking a deep breath. He felt a sense of accomplishment, not because he had won the situation, but because he had managed to navigate it with dignity, listening to both parties, and ensuring justice was served without unnecessary force or bias. The next day at the precinct, Chief Carter pulled Daniels aside once more, his eyes steady but approving. "You handled yourself well last night," Carter said, nodding. "You didn't just resolve the situation, you did it with respect and fairness. That's what it means to be an officer of integrity." Daniels felt a sense of pride, but it wasn't about receiving compliments, it was about the work he had done on himself, the work he had committed to every single day. His journey wasn't just about proving his worth to others, it was about showing himself that he was capable of being better, not just in the uniform, but as a human being. Months turned into a year, and Daniels had become a model of transformation within the precinct. He had not only earned the respect of his peers but also the community he served. And yet, despite his personal growth, Daniels knew that true success wasn't about never making mistakes again. It was about continually striving to be better, to serve others with dignity and understanding, and to never forget the lessons he had learned along the way. As Daniels stood in front of his locker, preparing for his shift, he realized that his journey was far from over. But this time, it was no longer about changing his actions for someone else's approval, it was about living with the integrity he had built, knowing that every day was a new opportunity to reaffirm who he truly was. And as long as he continued on this path, the past would no longer define him. He had become the man he was meant to be, a man of respect, responsibility, and redemption. The journey was never easy, but it was one worth taking.